The telegram arrived on a Wednesday morning in late March of 1882, and Colt Easton's hands shook as he read the words that threatened to destroy everything his father had built. The ranch would be seized by the territorial government unless he married within 90 days, a stipulation buried deep in his father's land grant that nobody had bothered to mention until now. The lawyer who delivered the news stood in the dusty yard of the Easton Ranch just outside Castle Dome, Arizona. His Eastern suit already wilting in the desert heat, explaining that territorial law required settled families on these large parcels to prevent land speculation. Colt's father had received an exemption as a widower with a son, but now that exemption had expired 6 months after his death, and the clock was ticking. Colt was 26 years old, hardened by the unforgiving Arizona desert, and he had never once considered marriage. His days were consumed by cattle, water rights, and keeping his dozen ranch hands fed and paid. The Easton Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of tough desert terrain, with enough grassland in the valleys to support nearly 2,000 head of cattle. His father had spent 30 years carving this empire from nothing, and now some bureaucrat in Tucson was threatening to take it all away because Colt lacked a wife. He stood on his porch that evening, watching the sun sink behind the Dome Rock Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. His foreman, an older Mexican man named Rodriguez, approached with his hat in his hands. "Boss, the men heard about the situation," Rodriguez said carefully. "They are worried about their jobs." "I know," Colt replied, his jaw tight. "I will figure something out. Perhaps you could place an advertisement. Mail-order brides are common now." Colt had considered it. He had also considered riding into Yuma and proposing to the first woman he saw. But marriage was supposed to mean something, was it not? His parents had loved each other deeply, and even though his mother had died when he was 12, he remembered the way they looked at each other. Could he really marry a stranger just to keep his land? The answer, he realized grimly, was yes. He would do whatever it took. The next morning, he rode into Castle Dome, a rough mining town that had sprung up near the Dome Rock Mountains when silver was discovered. The town consisted of a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon that never closed, a general store, a small church, and a handful of other establishments that served the miners and ranchers. Colt headed straight for the telegraph office and composed an advertisement for the territorial newspapers. "Rancher seeks wife. Must be willing to work hard and live remotely. Apply in person at Easton Ranch, Castle Dome, Arizona." It was not romantic, but it was honest. 3 weeks passed with no response. Colt grew increasingly desperate as April melted into May. He had 82 days left when he rode into Castle Dome again, this time to pick up supplies. The town was busier than usual, with a stagecoach stopped outside the hotel and passengers milling about, stretching their legs before the next portion of their journey. That was when he saw her. She stood apart from the other passengers, a slender woman in a plain gray traveling dress that was covered in trail dust. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she held a worn carpet bag in one hand while shading her eyes with the other, surveying the town with an expression that suggested she found it lacking. Even from a distance, Colt could see the determined set of her jaw and the way she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in this rough town. He was not sure what prompted him to approach her. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair. Maybe it was simply that time was running out. "Excuse me, miss," he said, removing his hat. "You look lost." She turned to him, and he found himself looking into eyes the color of honey, sharp and assessing. She was younger than he had first thought, probably around 23 or 24, with a face that was more interesting than pretty, all strong cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it smiled rarely but meant it when it did. "I am not lost," she said. Her voice was clear and educated with a slight Eastern accent. "I am simply disappointed. I was told Castle Dome was a town of opportunity, but it appears to be a town of dust and desperation." "That is an accurate description," Colt admitted. "Are you meeting someone here?" "No." She looked away, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I am starting over, if you must know. I had planned to find work here, but I can already see there are limited opportunities for a woman alone." "What kind of work do you do?" "I was a school teacher in Philadelphia. Before that, I helped run my father's bookshop." She met his eyes again, and there was pride there, mixed with something harder. "I am educated. I can read, write, keep accounts, and manage a household. I am also an excellent cook and a fair hand with mending. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Easton, Colt Easton. I run a ranch about 8 miles from here." "Natalie Harper," she said, extending her hand like a man would. He shook it, surprised by her firm grip. "Miss Harper, I know this will sound strange, but I have a proposition for you." The words were out before he could stop them, driven by the desperate awareness that he had only 70 days left, and here was a woman who needed a fresh start and the determination to see it through. Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of proposition?" "The respectable kind," he said quickly. "I need a wife. Legally within the next 70 days, or I lose my ranch. It is a long story involving territorial law and my father's land grant. In return, I can offer you a home, security, and a partnership of sorts. The ranch is profitable. You would want for nothing." He expected her to slap him or walk away. Instead, she studied him with those sharp, honey-colored eyes, and he found himself straightening under her scrutiny. "You are serious," she said finally. "Dead serious. I know it sounds insane, but I am out of options, and you just said you needed work." "This would be more than work. It would be a life, a real life. You do not even know me." "No, but I know you are brave enough to travel alone to the Arizona Territory, practical enough to assess your options clearly, and honest enough to admit when something is not what you hoped." "That is more than I could say about most of the people I do know." Natalie was silent for a long moment. A dust devil spun down the main street, and somewhere in the distance, a mine whistle blew. The stagecoach driver was calling for passengers to board again. "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course. The ranch is 8 miles north on the main road. If you decide you are interested, come out and see the place before you make up your mind. I will not hold you to anything until you are certain." She nodded slowly. "I may do that, Mr. Easton." He watched her rejoin the other passengers and board the stagecoach, which would take her the final miles to Yuma. As it pulled away in a cloud of dust, Rodriguez rode up beside him. "Did you just propose to a stranger?" the foreman asked, not bothering to hide his amusement. "I offered her the opportunity to consider a proposal," Colt corrected. "There is a difference." "If you say so, boss." Colt did not expect to see Natalie Harper again. Women like her, educated and refined, did not choose lives of hardship in the desert. She would reach Yuma, realize there were better options, and he would go back to his desperate planning. But 3 days later, a hired wagon arrived at the ranch, and Natalie Harper climbed down from it with her carpet bag and a trunk, looking determinedly at the sprawling adobe ranch house and the outbuildings scattered across the dusty yard. Colt came out of the barn, his shirt dusty and his hands dirty from repairing a saddle. He had not been expecting company, certainly not her. "Miss Harper," he said, surprised. "I decided to see what I would be getting into before I made my decision," she said. "Is the offer still open?" "It is." "Then show me." He showed her everything over the next several hours. The main house was large by territory standards, built by his father in the Mexican style with thick adobe walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter. There were 6 rooms. A large main room with a fireplace, a kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a small office. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was clean but lacked a woman's touch. He showed her the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the barn with its dozen horses, the cattle scattered across the valleys, and the deep well that made all of this possible. "The water rights alone are worth a fortune," he explained as they stood by the well. "My father fought for years to secure them. This ranch can support 5 times the number of cattle we currently run. I have been building it up slowly, but with the right management, it could be the finest operation in southern Arizona." "Why did your father not remarry after your mother died?" Natalie asked. "He loved her too much to replace her," Colt said simply. "I think he was just waiting to join her. When he got sick last year, he almost seemed relieved." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. They walked back toward the house in companionable silence. "Why did you leave Philadelphia?" he asked. Her face shuddered. "That is a long story. We have time." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I was engaged to be married to a banker's son, very respectable, very proper. 2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he had been keeping a mistress and had no intention of ending that arrangement after we married. When I confronted him, he told me I was being unreasonable to expect fidelity when I was getting his name and financial support. My family took his side, said I was throwing away my future over nothing, so I left. That took courage. It took desperation," she corrected. "I could not live a lie, no matter how comfortable that lie might be." "I can promise you honesty," Colt said. "I will not pretend to offer you romantic love or poetry. But I can offer you respect, partnership, and a real home. I will not take a mistress or dishonor you. If you agree to this marriage, I will do everything in my power to make it work." She searched his face, and he let her see the sincerity there. He was not a man who lied or made false promises. "I want to be clear about expectations," she said finally. "If I agree to this, I will be a true wife to you in all ways, but I will not be treated as property or a servant. I will have an equal say in household decisions and the right to pursue my own interests. I want to start a school here for the ranch children and any others in the area. And I want your word that if this does not work, you will provide me with the means to start over somewhere else." "Agreed," Colt said without hesitation, "though I hope it will not come to that." "So do I, Mr. Easton. If we are going to be married, you should call me Colt." "Very well, Colt." She took a deep breath. "I accept your proposal." They were married 6 days later in the small church in Castle Dome, with Rodriguez and the ranch cook, a tough old widow named Mrs. Sullivan, serving as witnesses. The preacher was a circuit rider who happened to be passing through, and he seemed more amused than scandalized by the hasty wedding. Natalie wore a simple blue dress she had made over during the past week, and Colt wore his best suit, which still smelled faintly of mothballs from storage. The ceremony was brief. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Colt kissed her carefully on the cheek, and she did not pull away. They signed the marriage certificate with Rodriguez grinning like a fool in the background. And just like that, with 71 days to spare, Colt Easton secured his ranch. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Natalie sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, and Colt found himself acutely aware of her presence. She was his wife now. The reality of what they had done was beginning to sink in. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "You? Same." She laughed, a sudden bright sound that made him smile. "Well, at least we are honest with each other." Mrs. Sullivan had prepared a wedding supper, which they ate in the main room with the evening light slanting through the windows. The ranch hands had discreetly made themselves scarce, giving the newlyweds privacy. After supper, an awkward silence fell. "I will take the room on the left," Natalie said finally. "You take the one on the right. We can use the middle one for storage or a future nursery or whatever makes sense." Colt felt relief mixed with something that might have been disappointment. "That sounds practical." "Practical is what we agreed on," she reminded him, but there was a softness in her voice that had not been there before. Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Natalie threw herself into organizing the household with the same determination she had shown in everything else. She worked alongside Mrs. Sullivan to establish order in the kitchen, inventoried the household goods, and began planning her school. Colt watched her moving through his home, making it truly a home for the first time since his mother died, and found himself increasingly fascinated by her. She was not what he had expected. She worked harder than any woman he had known, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spending her days teaching herself to manage the household accounts, and staying up late by lamplight to read or work on lessons for her planned school. She had a sharp wit and an even sharper tongue when crossed, but she was also surprisingly gentle with the younger ranch hands and infinitely patient with Mrs. Sullivan's stories. One evening in mid-June, about 3 weeks into their marriage, Colt found her standing outside watching the sunset. She had changed from her work dress into a simple cotton nightgown and wrapper, and her dark hair hung loose down her back. In the golden light, she looked softer than usual, almost vulnerable. "Beautiful evening," he said, joining her. "It is," she agreed. "I never expected to find beauty in the desert, but it is here if you know where to look." "Are you settling in all right?" "I am." She glanced at him. "Are you regretting your hasty decision to marry a stranger?" "No," he said honestly. "Are you?" "No." She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her genuinely beautiful. "I think we may have stumbled into something good here, Colt Easton." "I think so too, Natalie Easton." It was the first time he had used her married name, and he saw the flicker of pleasure in her eyes before she looked away. They stood together in companionable silence, and Colt realized he was content in a way he had not been in years. The turning point came in early July. Colt had been working with a particularly stubborn horse, trying to break it to saddle, when the animal reared and threw him. He hit the ground hard and his head cracked against a post. The next thing he knew, he was in his bed with a splitting headache and Natalie hovering over him with a wet cloth. "You scared 10 years off my life," she said, her hands shaking as she pressed the cloth to his forehead. "Rodriguez said you were unconscious for nearly a minute." "I am fine," he said, though his head throbbed. "You are not fine. You are lucky you did not break your fool neck." Her voice was sharp, but he could see genuine fear in her eyes. "Were you worried about me?" he asked, surprised. "Of course I was worried about you. You are my husband." She paused and then added more quietly, "And my friend, I think, or I hope we are becoming friends." "I hope so too," he said, catching her hand. "Natalie, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I want you to know that I value having you here. Not just because you saved my ranch, but because you make this place feel alive again." She looked down at their joined hands, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I feel the same way. When I saw you fall, I realized that somewhere in the past few weeks I had started to care about you, really care." "Is that such a bad thing?" "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "But it is frightening. I married you expecting a partnership, not feelings." "Maybe we can have both." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe we can." From that day forward, something shifted between them. They began taking evening rides together, exploring the ranch and talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Natalie told him about her father's bookshop and the freedom of losing herself in stories. Colt told her about growing up on the ranch and his mother's determination to civilize him despite the harsh surroundings. They began sharing meals alone rather than with the ranch hands, using the time to really talk and learn about each other. Colt discovered that Natalie loved thunderstorms and hated spiders, that she could recite poetry from memory, and had once dreamed of traveling to Europe. Natalie learned that Colt had taught himself to read from his mother's Bible, that he had a gift with horses, and that he secretly enjoyed the romance novels his mother had left behind. By August, they were sleeping in the same bed, though they had not yet consummated their marriage. They would lie together in the darkness, talking until sleep claimed them, and Colt found himself falling in love with his own wife. It was a strange feeling, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. One night, after a particularly long conversation about whether they should expand the herd or improve the irrigation system first, Natalie turned to him in the darkness. "Colt?" "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." His heart stopped. "You think?" "No, I know. I am falling in love with you, and it scares me because I did not expect this. I married you thinking we would be partners and friends, and now I find myself wanting more." He rolled over to face her, wishing there was enough light to see her expression clearly. "I am in love with you too. I think I have been for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated," she whispered. "I feel hopeful." He kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time since their wedding day. She responded with a passion that surprised them both, and that night they became husband and wife in truth. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Natalie laughed softly. "What is funny?" Colt asked, running his fingers through her hair. "I was just thinking about how I came to Arizona Territory expecting to find work as a teacher, and instead I found a husband, a home, and love. Life is strange. Strange, but good. Very good." She kissed his shoulder. "Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate stranger in Castle Dome. Thank you for saying yes. You saved more than my ranch, Natalie. You saved me." The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Natalie opened her school in September, teaching the children of ranch hands and nearby families in a converted storage building. She proved to be a gifted teacher, patient but firm, and soon had students riding in from as far as 10 miles away. Colt expanded the herd and began improvements to the irrigation system, working alongside his men but always making sure to be home for supper with his wife. In October, Natalie told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is going to be 3 of us soon," she said. Colt felt joy explode through him, so intense it was almost painful. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Sullivan confirmed it. The baby should come in late May or early June. He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "I love you so much." "I love you too," she said against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from morning sickness well into her 4th month, and the Arizona heat made her final months miserable. But she never complained, and Colt did everything he could to make her comfortable. He brought her cool water from the well, rubbed her swollen feet, and read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to keep her eyes open. Their son was born on June 3, 1883, just over a year after Colt had received the telegram that changed his life. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Colt feared he would lose both mother and child. But Natalie was as strong in childbirth as she was in everything else, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Colt wept with relief. They named him James after Colt's father, and he had his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's determined chin. Colt held his son for the first time and felt the final piece of his heart click into place. "We did it," he said to Natalie, who looked exhausted but radiant. "We built a family." "We did," she agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "And it is even better than I imagined." The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. James grew into a sturdy, curious child who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow. Natalie's school flourished, and she gained a reputation throughout southern Arizona as an excellent teacher. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Natalie handling the accounts and correspondence, while Colt oversaw the cattle and land. In 1885, they had a daughter named Sarah, who had Natalie's dark hair and Colt's gray eyes and a temper that could match either parent. In 1887, another son arrived, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift with animals that rivaled his father's. As the years passed, the 90-day deadline that had brought them together became a family joke. Every year on their anniversary, Colt would say, "Thank God I found you with 1 day to spare," and Natalie would reply, "Thank God I was desperate enough to say yes." But they both knew the truth was deeper than that. What had started as a marriage of convenience had become a love story neither of them had expected. They had built not just a life together, but a partnership based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that grew stronger with each passing year. In the spring of 1895, 13 years after their hasty wedding, Colt stood on the porch of their ranch house and surveyed his kingdom. The ranch had grown to encompass 20,000 acres and ran nearly 3,000 head of cattle. Natalie's school had expanded into a proper schoolhouse in Castle Dome, with 2 additional teachers working under her direction. Their children were healthy and happy, James already showing signs of becoming an excellent rancher, Sarah displaying her mother's sharp intelligence, and Michael developing his gentle way with animals. Natalie came out to join him, slipping her hand into his the way she had done thousands of times over the years. She was 36 now, with fine lines around her eyes and a few strands of silver in her dark hair, and Colt thought she was more beautiful than ever. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am," he said simply. "How different my life would be if you had not been standing in Castle Dome that day, looking disappointed in what you saw." "I was not disappointed for long," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "You gave me everything I did not know I wanted. A home, a purpose, children, and a love I thought only existed in novels." "I was thinking the same thing," he admitted. "I married you to save my ranch, but you saved so much more than that. You gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond my lifetime. You gave me a family and a future." She turned to face him, her honey-colored eyes still as sharp and assessing as they had been the day they met, but now filled with warmth and love. "We gave those things to each other, Colt. That is what makes us work. We built this together, brick by brick, day by day. I love you, Natalie Easton, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too." She kissed him, and even after 13 years of marriage, the touch of her lips still made his heart race. "Now come inside, Mrs. Sullivan made your favorite pie, and if we do not get there soon, James will eat the whole thing." He laughed and let her lead him inside, into the warm, noisy, perfect chaos of their home. Through the window, he could see the sun setting over the Dome Rock Mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and he sent up a silent prayer of thanks for telegram deadlines, desperate circumstances, and brave women willing to take chances on strangers. As the door closed behind them, the ranch settled into evening quiet. The cattle lowed in the distance, horses nickered in the barn, and somewhere a coyote called to the rising moon. This was the West, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, but it was also home. It was the place where a desperate rancher and a displaced teacher had found each other with one day to spare, and built a love that would echo through generations. Years continued to pass at the Easton Ranch, each one adding new layers to the foundation Colt and Natalie had built. By 1898, James was 15 and had grown into a young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's sharp business sense. He could rope a steer as well as any of the ranch hands, but he also kept meticulous records and had ideas about modernizing the operation that even Colt had to admit were sound. Sarah, at 13, was already showing signs of becoming a formidable woman. She had no interest in ranching, but had inherited her mother's passion for education. She spent her free time helping at the school and had announced her intention to become a teacher herself, possibly even attending normal school in California when she was old enough. Natalie supported this dream wholeheartedly, though Colt struggled with the idea of his daughter leaving Arizona. Michael, at 11, was the one who surprised them all. Quiet and gentle, he had a way with the ranch animals that bordered on magical. Horses that bucked and fought with everyone else would calm under his hands. Cattle would follow him like a Pied Piper. Even the ranch dogs preferred him to anyone else. Colt knew his middle son would never be a traditional rancher, but there was a place for him here if he wanted it. In late autumn of that year, trouble came to Castle Dome in the form of a mining company that wanted to dig on the northern portion of the Easton Ranch. Representatives arrived with legal documents and aggressive attorneys, claiming that mineral rights trumped land grants, and that Colt had no choice but to allow them access. Colt met with the representatives in town, with Natalie by his side. She had insisted on coming, and he was grateful for her presence. The lead attorney was a smooth-talking man from San Francisco who clearly thought he could intimidate a simple rancher into submission. He had not counted on Natalie. "Your claim is based on a survey from 1879, she said, spreading out her own documents on the table. However, our land grant predates that survey by 8 years and specifically includes all mineral rights in perpetuity. Furthermore, your company failed to file the proper notices with the territorial office, which means your claim is invalid under Territorial Law Section 247, Paragraph 3. The attorney stared at her, his mouth open. "How do you know territorial law?" I read, Natalie said coolly. "I suggest you return to San Francisco and inform your employers that the Easton Ranch is not available for mining operations now or ever. If you attempt to proceed without our consent, we will pursue legal action that will tie your company up in court for years." The mining company backed down, and the incident became a local legend. The refined schoolteacher from Philadelphia had out-lawyered a San Francisco attorney without breaking a sweat. Colt could not have been prouder. That evening, as they sat together in their room, he pulled her into his arms. "You were magnificent today." "I was practical," she corrected, but he could see her pleasure at his praise. "I have been reading up on mining law ever since we heard rumors about the company nosing around. I was not about to let anyone take what we have built. We make a good team." "The best," she agreed, tilting her face up for a kiss. The turn of the century arrived with celebrations throughout the territory. The Easton family marked the occasion with a party at the ranch, inviting neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Castle Dome, and all of Natalie's students and their families. The house was filled with music and laughter, and as midnight approached, Colt found himself standing apart from the crowd, watching his family. Natalie was laughing with Mrs. Sullivan, who was now in her 70s, but still insisted on cooking for major events. James was dancing with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emma who blushed whenever he looked at her. Sarah was engaged in animated conversation with the town doctor about medical schools that accepted women. Michael sat in a corner with a ranch dog at his feet, looking content to observe rather than participate. Rodriguez approached with 2 glasses of whiskey. The foreman was graying now, moving a bit slower but still sharp as ever. "To the new century, boss." "To the new century," Colt echoed, accepting the glass. "And to old friends. I remember when you came back from town that day in 1882, looking like you had seen a ghost, and told me you had offered marriage to a stranger," Rodriguez said with a chuckle. "I thought you had lost your mind." "I probably had," Colt admitted. "Best decision I ever made, though. The best." Rodriguez clinked his glass against Colt's. "You built something special here. Your father would be proud." As if sensing his thoughts, Natalie appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. She was 39 now, and the years had only enhanced her beauty in his eyes. The sharp edges had softened with time and happiness, but the strength and intelligence that had first attracted him remained as powerful as ever. "Happy New Century," she said. "Happy New Century," he replied. "Any predictions for what the next 100 years will bring?" "More of the same, I hope. Hard work, good friends, family, and love. What else could anyone want? Not a thing," Colt said, pulling her close as the clock struck midnight and the new century began. The early years of the new century brought both changes and continuity to the Easton Ranch. In 1902, James married Emma in a ceremony that brought together families from across southern Arizona. The young couple moved into a new house that Colt and James had built on the eastern portion of the ranch, and James began managing that section while Colt oversaw the rest. It was a good arrangement that allowed the ranch to expand while keeping it in family hands. Sarah left for normal school in Los Angeles in 1903, and Natalie cried for days despite her support of the decision. Colt held his wife at night and let her grieve the loss of their daughter's daily presence, even as they both knew it was the right thing. Sarah wrote long letters home every week, filled with descriptions of her classes and her dreams, and Natalie treasured each one. Michael stayed at the ranch, finding his calling working with the horses. By the time he was 16, he had developed a reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory. Ranchers from as far as Tucson would send their problem horses to the Easton Ranch, and Michael would work his quiet magic until the animals were transformed. In 1905, tragedy struck when Rodriguez died peacefully in his sleep. He had been with the ranch for over 30 years, and his loss hit Colt hard. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley, and Colt spent weeks working himself to exhaustion to avoid dealing with the grief. It was Natalie who finally pulled him out of his spiral. She found him in the barn late one night, pretending to work on tack that did not need mending. "He would not want you to mourn him like this," she said quietly, sitting down beside him on a hay bale. "I know." Colt set down the bridle he had been holding. "He was my friend, Natalie. One of my first friends after my father died. I do not know how to run this ranch without him. You do know. He taught you everything he knew, and you have been running this ranch alongside him for years. You are not losing his knowledge or his influence. Those things live on in you and in how you run this operation. It still hurts. Of course it hurts. That is what happens when you love people, but the hurt is worth it for all the years of friendship that came before." She took his hand. "We will get through this together, just like we get through everything. That is what we do." She was right, as she usually was. The grief faded to a manageable ache and life continued. They promoted one of the younger ranch hands, a capable man named Tom who had learned under Rodriguez, to foreman. The ranch continued to prosper. In 1906, Sarah returned from Los Angeles with her teaching certificate and news that made Natalie cry again, this time with joy. Sarah had met a young doctor named Daniel Wright, who was planning to set up practice in Yuma. They wanted to marry and for Sarah to teach in Yuma while supporting Daniel's medical practice. The wedding took place in the summer of 1907, and the Easton Ranch once again filled with celebration. Colt walked his daughter down the aisle of the Castle Dome Church and tried not to think about how quickly the years had passed. When had his little girl become this confident, capable woman? "You look like you are attending a funeral, not a wedding," Natalie whispered as they took their seats after giving Sarah away. "I am happy for her," Colt whispered back. "I just miss her already, me too. But we raised her to fly, not to stay in the nest." By 1908, James and Emma had 2 children, a son named Colt after his grandfather and a daughter named Rose. Watching his son raise his own children, Colt was struck by how much James resembled him at that age. The young man had the same determination, the same love of the land, and the same fierce devotion to family. One evening, as 3 generations of Eastons gathered for Sunday dinner, Colt looked around the crowded table and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. His grandchildren were laughing and arguing over who got the last biscuit. Michael was describing a new training technique he wanted to try. James and Emma were discussing plans to expand their herd. And Natalie, his beautiful wife of nearly 26 years, was presiding over the chaos with the calm efficiency she brought to everything. After dinner, when the others had gone and only Colt and Natalie remained, they walked out to their favorite spot on the porch. It had become a ritual over the years, these quiet moments at the end of the day when they could simply be together. "You ever think about that day in Castle Dome?" Natalie asked. "When you walked up to a stranger and proposed marriage?" "Sometimes," Colt admitted. "Usually when I want to remind myself how lucky I am. I think about it too. I think about how terrified I was and how I almost got back on that stagecoach without even considering your offer. What if I had been just a little bit less desperate or a little bit more proud? But you were not. You took a chance on a desperate rancher, and look what we built." "We built something extraordinary," Natalie agreed. "Not just this ranch or our family, but this life, this partnership. I could not have imagined any of this when I left Philadelphia, but I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They made the good parts sweeter." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I love you, Colt Easton, more today than yesterday. Less than tomorrow," he finished, the phrase they had been exchanging for years. "I love you too, Natalie. You are still the best decision I ever made, even if I only had one day to spare." She laughed, that bright sound that still made his heart skip. "Actually, you found me with 89 days to spare. We were married with 71 days left." "Details," he said, pulling her closer. "The point is, I found you just in time." "We found each other," she corrected, "and we built a lifetime." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to hard work, determination, and the transformative power of love. The years continued to roll by with the steady inevitability of the seasons. In 1910, Michael surprised everyone by falling in love with a girl from Yuma, a rancher's daughter named Catherine who shared his gentle way with animals. They married in a simple ceremony and built their own small ranch on the western portion of the Easton land, specializing in horse breeding and training. Sarah and Daniel had 3 children by 1912, and Sarah managed to balance motherhood with teaching part-time at a school in Yuma. She would bring the children to visit the ranch several times a year, and Natalie would spoil her grandchildren shamelessly, while Sarah and Colt talked about books, politics, and the changing world. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined management of Colt, James, and Michael. They had modernized in some ways, bringing in new breeding stock and improving their water management systems. But the core of the operation remained true to what Colt's father had built and what Colt and Natalie had expanded. It was a family operation, built on trust and hard work, and it had earned a reputation throughout Arizona Territory as one of the finest cattle ranches in the region. In 1912, Arizona achieved statehood, and Castle Dome celebrated with a parade and festival that lasted 3 days. The Easton family was there in force, 3 generations strong, and Colt felt a surge of pride as he watched the American flag raised over the new state. His father had come to this harsh land when it was still wild and largely lawless. Now it was a state, civilized and prosperous, and the Easton Ranch had played its part in that transformation. That evening, back at the ranch, Colt and Natalie escaped the family celebration to walk down to the creek that ran through their property. It was a warm February night, unusually mild, and the desert was alive with the sounds of evening. "Your father would have loved to see statehood," Natalie said. "He would have. And he would have loved to see what we built here, the grandchildren especially. He always wanted a big family." "We gave him that," Natalie said with satisfaction. 4 grandchildren and counting. Sarah mentioned in her last letter that she might be expecting again. "You will wear yourself out traveling to Yuma every time one of our children has a baby," Colt teased. "I absolutely will, and you will be right beside me," Natalie shot back. "Do not pretend you are any less excited about grandchildren than I am." She was right, of course. He loved being a grandfather, loved watching his children raise their own families, loved the continuity and promise it represented. They sat by the creek for a long time, listening to the water burble over stones and watching the moon rise over the mountains. After 30 years of marriage, they did not always need words. Sometimes just being together was enough. "Colt," Natalie said eventually. "Yes. Thank you for walking up to a stranger in Castle Dome all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance." "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes," he replied. "And for every day since then." In 1915, the world beyond Arizona began to intrude on their peaceful existence. War was raging in Europe, and though America remained neutral, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the country was drawn in. James and Michael were too old for conscription, but there were young ranch hands who talked eagerly about enlisting. Colt and Natalie tried not to think about the possibility of war touching their family directly, but it was always there, lurking at the edges of their consciousness. They focused instead on what they could control: the ranch, the family, their community. Natalie, now in her mid-50s, had officially retired from teaching, though she still tutored students privately and served on the school board. She had more time for the things she loved: reading, spending time with her grandchildren, and working alongside Colt on the ranch. Her hair was more silver than dark now, and she moved a bit more carefully than she once had. But to Colt, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her in Castle Dome. They celebrated their 33rd anniversary in 1915 with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. Their children had offered to host a party, but Colt and Natalie had declined. Some occasions were meant to be intimate. 33 years, Natalie mused over dessert. "When did we get old? Speak for yourself." "I am in my prime," Colt said with a grin. She threw a napkin at him. "You are 59 years old and you grunt every time you get out of a chair." "That is not age, That is dignity, she laughed, and the sound still made his heart lift. I love you, you ridiculous man. I love you too, you impossible woman. Later, lying in bed together, Natalie said quietly, Do you ever regret it? Any of it? Not for a single second, Colt said without hesitation. Why, do you? Never. I was just thinking about how different my life could have been if I had stayed in Philadelphia and made peace with my family. If I had never gotten on that stagecoach, if you had not been in Castle Dome that particular day. But you did, and I was, and here we are. Here we are, she agreed, nestling closer to him, right where we belong. By 1918, the war had indeed drawn America in, and though their sons were spared by age, they lost 2 young ranch hands to the fighting in France. The deaths hit the entire ranch community hard, and Colt and Natalie attended both funerals, standing with the families and grieving for young lives cut short. It made them acutely aware of their own mortality and how precious each day was. Colt was 62 now, still strong but no longer invincible. Natalie was 58, dealing with arthritis in her hands that made some tasks difficult. They began to talk seriously about succession planning, about making sure the ranch would continue to thrive after they were gone. James was the obvious choice to take over the main ranch, with Michael managing the horse operations. Both sons were capable and committed, and they had children who would carry on the legacy. It was a comfort to know that what Colt and Natalie had built would endure. In the summer of 1920, they gathered the entire family together for a formal meeting. All 3 children and their spouses came, along with the older grandchildren. Colt stood at the head of the table in the main house, feeling the weight of years and responsibility. Your mother and I wanted to talk to you all about the future of this ranch, he began. We are not going anywhere anytime soon, but we are also not young anymore. It is time to make sure everything is in order. He laid out the succession plan he and Natalie had developed, with James taking over primary management of the cattle operation and Michael continuing with the horses. Sarah and her husband would receive a financial settlement equal to their siblings' inheritance, along with a permanent stake in the ranch's profits. Everything was fair and equitable, designed to keep the family together rather than divide them. This ranch has been the center of our lives for nearly 40 years, Natalie added. It represents everything your father and I have built together, and we want to make sure it continues to be a place of family and love, not conflict and division. There were tears and hugs, and eventually, the conversation turned to memories and laughter. The grandchildren demanded stories of the old days, and Colt and Natalie obliged, recounting tales of the ranch's early years and their unconventional courtship. So grandfather literally walked up to you on the street and proposed marriage? Asked young Colt, James's son, who was now 16 and the spitting image of his grandfather. Not exactly, Natalie said with a smile. He walked up to me and made a very practical business proposition. I was the one foolish enough to say yes to a stranger. Best decision you ever made, Colt interjected. Second best, Natalie corrected. The best decision was staying and building a life with you. As the family celebration continued around them, Colt caught Natalie's eye across the table. So much had changed since that desperate day in 1882, when he had received the telegram that threatened his father's legacy. He had been given 90 days to find a wife or lose everything, and he had found her with only 89 days gone. But the real miracle was not that he had found her in time. The miracle was what they had built together in the decades since. A partnership that had deepened into love, a family that spanned 3 generations, a ranch that had prospered beyond his father's wildest dreams. The years rolled on with their steady rhythm. By 1925, Colt and Natalie had been married for 43 years. Colt was 69, his hair completely white, his body bearing the scars and stiffness of a lifetime of ranch work. Natalie was 65, her arthritis more pronounced, her movements slower but still purposeful. They had both earned their rest, but neither was quite ready to stop completely. They spent their days in a comfortable routine. Mornings were for coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise and discussing the day ahead. Colt would ride out with James to check on the herd, though he no longer did the hard physical labor. Natalie would work in her garden, correspond with friends and family, and spend time with whichever grandchildren happened to be visiting. Evenings were still theirs alone, quiet hours on the porch or in their room, talking about everything and nothing. One evening in late spring, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and amber, Natalie said, "Do you remember our conversation on the first night we met? When I told you I wanted to be clear about expectations." "I remember every conversation we have ever had," Colt replied. "But yes, I remember that one especially. You wanted equal say in household decisions and the right to pursue your own interests." "I did. And you gave me all of that and so much more. You gave me a partnership, Colt. A real partnership based on respect and trust and eventually love. You never treated me as less than your equal, never dismissed my opinions or my dreams." "Why would I? You are the smartest, most capable person I know. I would have been a fool not to listen to you." "Many men would have, though." "Many did back in Philadelphia. They wanted a decorative wife, not a partner." She reached over and took his hand. "I just wanted you to know that I see what you gave me. I appreciate it every single day." "You gave me just as much," Colt said. "More, maybe. You gave me a home, a family, and a love I never expected to find. You made my life infinitely richer." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the day fade into night. After more than 4 decades together, they had achieved something rare, a love that had deepened and matured without losing its essential spark. They were partners, friends, and lovers still, and the years had only strengthened the bond between them. In the summer of 1926, they celebrated their 44th anniversary with a massive party that brought together family and friends from across Arizona. The ranch was filled with people, 3 generations of Eastons and countless others whose lives had been touched by Colt and Natalie over the years. Former students of Natalie's came with their own children. Ranch hands who had worked for Colt decades ago returned to pay their respects. Neighboring ranchers and townspeople from Castle Dome all gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. James stood up to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents met under unusual circumstances. Dad needed a wife to save his ranch, and Mom needed a fresh start. It was a practical arrangement that could have remained just that, a partnership of convenience. But instead, they built something remarkable. They showed all of us what real love looks like, patient, steadfast, and strong enough to weather any storm. They built not just a successful ranch, but a family legacy that will endure for generations. To Colt and Natalie Easton, the finest people I know." The assembled crowd raised their glasses, and Colt felt his eyes sting with tears. He looked at Natalie, who was dabbing at her own eyes, and saw his whole life reflected in her face. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph and challenge. She had been there for all of it, his constant companion and greatest love. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and they were alone in their room, Colt pulled Natalie into his arms. They moved together in a slow dance, though there was no music except the beating of their hearts. 44 years, he murmured against her hair, "and I still feel like the luckiest man alive every time I look at you." "I feel the same way," Natalie said, though luck had very little to do with it. We worked for this, Colt. We chose each other every single day for 44 years. That was not luck. That was commitment and love. You are right, as always. We chose each other, and I would choose you again in a heartbeat. Even knowing all my faults, my stubbornness, my temper, my insistence on being right. Especially knowing all your faults, he said with a smile. They make you who you are, and you are perfect to me. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and intimacy. I love you, Colt Easton. Thank you for marrying me with 71 days to spare. 89, he corrected. I found you with 89 days to spare. Best use of a day I ever made. As they held each other in the quiet of their room, the ranch settled into night around them. Outside, the desert stretched vast and beautiful under a canopy of stars. The cattle were safe in their pastures. The horses rested in their corrals. The next generation slept peacefully in their beds, secure in the legacy that Colt and Natalie had built. It had started with a desperate telegram and an impossible deadline. It had continued with a chance encounter in a dusty Arizona town and a practical proposal from a stranger. But it had become something far greater, a love story that spanned decades, a partnership that built an empire, and a family that would carry on their legacy long after they were gone. Colt Easton had needed 90 days to find a wife or lose his land. He had found Natalie Harper with 89 days gone, and in doing so, he had found not just a wife but his soulmate, his partner, and the love of his life. Together, they had turned a marriage of convenience into one of the great love stories of the Arizona Territory, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on strangers and being brave enough to build something new. As sleep claimed them, still wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for thousands of nights before, Colt's last thought was one of profound gratitude. He had been given 90 days, but what he found in those final hours had given him a lifetime of happiness. And that, he thought, was the greatest gift of all.